So my mom asked if I was going to be available on Saturday, and my kindred's doing Thoroblood on Saturday, so I'm like, no. And she's like, "What's Thoroblood?" I'm like, "Well, we blow to Thor." She's like, "What does that mean?" It's like, "Well, we sacrifice to Thor." My mom's very Christian. Like, she only understands like polytheism and other religions on a super basic academic level. And I was like, "Well, bloat means to sacrifice." And she's like, "Well, what does sacrifice mean?" I was like, "Well, you give something." And she's like, "Well, what are you sacrificing?" And I swear, I look her dead at the face, and I'm just like a cat. I picked it up from the Humane Society yesterday, and I managed to hold a straight face just long enough for the look of horror to spawn on her face. It was the best thing ever.
You're horrible. The jokes pagans could play on other people.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, my mom's a big cat lady. Like, she's borderline that cat lady. So I saw an opportunity and I couldn't resist.
Imagine the horror in her eyes.
Bro, it like I wish I would have recorded that. It was epic. Cuz I'm usually horrible. I start telling a joke and I start
Wow.
up. But I was able to hold a straight face
Yeah.
for like a good 4 or 5 seconds as she processed what I was saying.
I know this is going to sound really strange, but a lot of times I am just doing the joke in my head and I'm very serious, and people interpret me as very serious when I'm speaking. So I
Mhm.
can pull the craziest type of things, and it's completely funny to me, but the other people are just left dumbfounded and I'm just cracking up inside.
So, what we're going to talk about
So
this week?
I say, you know, I'm impressed. Well, real quick, I have to mention, I'm very impressed with the results that we've gotten. For our first episode, the feedback that I've gotten, I'm astounded by the amount of views that we've got for just having a brand new episode out of the blue that we just spontaneously did on Saturday. And then it's less than 20 away from being in the top 25 percentile of podcasts.
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, Joe hasn't gotten me back to me with his thoughts, but Mason called me last night. We talked about a few other things, and he said he really liked it too. He thought there was a lot of really good information. And then he starts asking me a whole bunch of questions about universalists that I could only vaguely answer.
And I'm not trying to reach a million people. I just, I feel like the conversations that you and I have had over the time we've known each other have been very informational, and I just thought people would benefit from hearing our discussions back and forth, because there's a lot of information that we are sharing and we are discussing, and I know there's other people out there that have the same questions or thoughts or ideas, and are just eager and hungry to learn.
Yeah. Well, I definitely agree, although I definitely think the information is more you. I'm just pretty good at articulating questions and asking, what's the word, expounding questions, or I'm a good asker, I think. I don't feel like I know all that much, but I know enough to have a
Well,
conversation.
well, and the thing is I feel like you know more than the average person out there. Like you know basic stories and lore and stuff, but we're going more in depth with these conversations, where it's getting to the next college level, beyond just freshman understanding of what the faith is of our ancestors and how to practice that faith.
Yeah, like as far as the lore go, we're not at no point are we talking about what it is. It's always like what it means, and then with the other stuff, it's like how do we bring that into today to where we're being heathens in 2022 and not in the 8th century.
So, as far as discussion topics tonight, I know in our last episode, you wanted to start going over like the timeline of events, and I wanted to touch a little bit more on the epic methodology. But we had talked, I believe it was just yesterday, about each of us having a few topics that we can discuss, and hopefully through the conversation itself we'll naturally weave the different topics leading from what we wanted to discuss in the first place, in the lore and the timeline of it. Now,
Yeah.
the topic of the lore and the timeline is can go on for many episodes, so there's no way we're going to be able to cover it all in one episode. But definitely I want to begin a process where in each episode we start kind of unraveling it over time. How's that
Yeah.
sound to you?
No, that sounds perfect. Because yeah, it's. I was even thinking about that too. After we had said that, is even with just the stuff I've read, like to try to talk about it all at once, it'd be like a 3-4 hour conversation to even really scratch the surface. So there's no way we'd be able to cramp all that into the 45 minutes to an hour we spend talking on this.
When we talked, we kind of wanted to broadly discuss. I came up with three, and you came up with three. My three were identity, lore, and the epic timeline. And do you remember what you had told me
Yeah,
for
my first
yours?
one was piety. The second one was building tribe and culture, and then my third one was ethics and morals.
Those are great topics, actually. Definitely think that together. So let's start. I want to start with your topic first. So,
Okay.
what was your idea on the topic of piety? What was crossing your mind?
Um, well, I had just listened to a couple different Dave Martell, the Bog streams, and they were talking about it. And like the first thing that came to my mind is this concept you hear, we don't kneel before our gods, or the argument that we don't have dogma, which as I've studied more, we definitely do. And really just and I've seen this on both sides of the universalist folkish spectrum, is the looking at the gods and goddesses as just archetypes, or aspects of other things. And to me, like when I think piety, I just think strong devotion, and I don't see how you can have a super strong devotion to an archetype or some nameless thing that you're just acknowledging a certain perspective of. Kind of jumbled, but my mind's not
Okay.
always
Okay.
a.
No, I'm following you. I understand. I guess before I get my thoughts on that specific topic and what you brought up, um, I I want to say this. I know that there's a lot of people out there into different. They're trying to find a path. They're trying to find a way. Um, and a lot of people attached to different traditions, in different things. In modern day, you have a lot of people that are looking into, for example, Wicca, or maybe they're attaching to some type of occultist philosophy or theology or practice in some way.
Yeah.
And usually, at least in America, a lot of people come from a background where their parents or grandparents were traditionally Christian in belief.
Yeah.
So people start to have, as more and more information is being propagated out there, more and more people are looking for the path to follow that feels right and natural to them, because that's part of your natural instincts.
Yeah.
So if make up things, if you will, it leads to a situation where there's a lot of confusion in society. And we have these traditions that have been started at different points. For example, Wicca, I believe that was originally started about 60 or 70 years ago, if memory serves me correctly. But, and I'm not saying that that's a bad practice or tradition or anything like that, but it is a newer tradition. And the person that tried to do that was attempting to reconstruct a traditional magical system from the gods and goddesses of Europe.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of syncretism that happened. And what I mean by syncretism is that there was a lot of a mixing of traditions to make it into one, pulling from Germanic gods and then Greek gods and all these sorts of different gods.
Yeah. I
And
believe the guy's name was
people
Gerald
have
Gardner.
embraced it.
Is Gerald Gardner. As far as who's
Yes,
attributed to the founding of modern Wicca.
To reconstruct a tradition that people feel attracted to because there's something to it, you know. And this tradition began after the conversion period of Europe to Christianity. There was still people that were pagan in beliefs. A lot of the traditions that we've carried on over the years have been integrated into different Christian beliefs. Christmas and Yule being one of the prime examples to talk about. But this started with Jacob Grimm when he went all throughout Germania and Europe looking for folk stories to collect and document. And he began essentially trying to reconstruct what the belief systems were of the ancient Germanic people before the conversion period. And he did a really good job at doing it. He collected a lot of information that we rely on today to know. But the next person, which was just shortly after Jacob Grimm, was Victor Rydberg. And he's probably the most underrated mythologist and historian of Europe, at least in regards to Germanic mythology. And he began recognizing a pattern between the myths and began reconstructing these myths by recognizing the similarities in other Indo-European mythologies, the Vedic tradition being one of them, even the Greeks and Romans and Slavics and Finnish. And he noticed that there was a pattern to these stories on how they essentially developed over time, where there's a beginning and all these events that transpired during, and then there was an ending. And he started looking at the lore and reconstructing the lore piece by piece with a broad understanding of what the storyline is from the greater Indo-European mythology.
Mm-hmm.
So that began the process where people began recognizing that there is a system here. And as we get further into the 1800s and then into the 1900s, you had other people attempting to do the same thing in this reconstruction. So for the people out there that are attaching to these traditions, I want to urge you to find a tradition that is reconstructed not from modern inventions or understandings or syncretizing with other foreign systems, but look to your forebears, the people that you come from, and look at the traditions that they practice and attach to those as purely as you can, because there is power in that. And what I mean by this, and I know I've told you this before, Anthony, and a few other people as well, but you can put power into anything. I can go outside, pick up a rock, and begin making offerings to it and meditating and exchanging energy with it. And it can slowly over time build up a force about it. And yeah, it still has a power it's been given, but I could take something that's 2,000 years old, where people have been building a tradition and power around that, and it's going to have a lot more force and a lot more power about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like what I said when you first mentioned it to me. It's like, why start trying to roll a new boulder when you can just start putting your power behind one that's already moving and help it be that much better.
Exactly. Exactly. And there's a purpose behind of our ancestors. And hopefully over time we'll be able to unravel what that is. But I want to get back to what you had made a comment about piety and what it means. You know, I think it comes down to uh, one's moral compass and morality that they have in life. And I had a discussion when I was a part of a group where we talked about a lot of these same subjects, and we all kind of came to an understanding of what morality meant to our folk is very different than what people understand morality as being today. Um, the gods are gods for several reasons. They're creative forces, whereas other entities are destructive forces. Our gods bring order, and those that bring chaos and destruction, we will never count as our gods. When you look at the word good in English, for example, it comes from the word God. That which is good is that which is like the gods.
Yeah.
The gods exist as essentially a value creating force. So, for whatever is good is their very nature, and it's their will, and it ultimately yields good results. This is part of the entire order of the world, which good yields good. Now, we can look at other things in the universe, other beings and energies and forces, and that are destructive in nature. There's a lot of different types of forces that are just destructive in nature. It's not just, certain Yotan. There's other things with malintent. So what separates us as a people is that our gods are the most important because they are the source of origin of our goodness in and of itself. When you look at the other side of the coin, because on the opposite side of good stands evil. A lot of people don't think that the terms good and evil are related to anything about our tradition, but the words themselves derive from Old Norse. Evil comes from the word ill, and it means bad or misfortune. So that which is bad is something that produces undesirable results. Thus, the phrase misfortune. And this goes all the way back to the paradigm of order and chaos, where bad produces bad results and good produces results. So, when you're talking about Germanic theology and the inheritance of our soul, this is something that's passed on to us from our progenitors. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So like the one thing and that like I was confused about very early on, and like personally, like I was raised Jehovah Witness. Got my whole family got excommunicated, so I started studying a lot of other religions. And in a lot of things that I read, I developed this concept of having to balance order and chaos within yourselves. And when I found Asatru, that kind of immediately kind of transformed into, well, should I also be honoring the Jotuns as the forces of chaos as I do to the gods being being forces for order? And that is just not how we do things. So I was wondering if you could maybe expand on that as well, because I know on this topic there's going to be other people that also have that understanding.
Let's go back to some of what we talked about in the first episode about Loki and being bound, and it ties into the timeline as well of events. So the beginning of the story of the folk is essentially whenever the gods went to war. That the war was caused because of Sather, and that the practice of this was spread from the Vanir to the Aesir, and the Aesir began practicing it, and eventually it caused chaos and death and murder and all sorts of ill actions. And as a result of this war, there was a peace treaty between the Aesir and the Vanir. And during this peace treaty, there was accusations against Golve that she was the person spreading this evil among the folk and the people. And because of her actions and the effects of those actions, she was sentenced to die. So she's the one referred to in the lore as the one that was killed 3 times because she kept coming back. Loki would eat her heart, and when he ate her heart, he bred Fenrir, and he ate her heart a second time and bred, or the first time was actually Jormungandr that was formed from him eating the heart, and the second time was Fenrir, and then the third time was Laken. And so this was a chaos that they continue to spread, and that chaos feeds on itself. And it's a very entangled story, and it's hard to kind of separate some of these parts, but I don't want to get too in depth on the story because it could take a very long time to explain. So I'm going to just kind of jump ahead a little bit. And the war itself that was caused, essentially everything was revealed that was going on, where Loki and his brood were attempting to destroy the Aesir and dishonor them and cause problems among them. And there was a trial, it's recorded in Lokasena, and he was bound, but his children still live on. And these children, they were formed specifically to destroy the universe, to destroy the gods, and to destroy everything. And the gods, their job is to essentially prevent the destruction of everything and allow life to continue on. So when somebody is knowingly, somebody that has all the information, because I know that there's a lot of books out there people they read like one book from whatever author and they think that's how, it is. But once you start actually deep diving into these things and reading some of the more advanced works and studying with people that actually know what they're talking about, and you learn about the history of these things, you'll understand that when you are knowingly making a decision to worship chaotic forces, you're making yourself an enemy of the gods themselves, and B, you are actively trying to destroy things around you and cause chaos around you. So it's against our natural state as being descendants of the gods to actually do that. And a person that knowingly does that and embraces that, in my mind, has to be crazy, number one, to go against the gods. Number two, most likely that person, I would say, number two, most likely that person doesn't actually have a complete understanding of the history and the relationship of the gods and the chaotic forces that be.
Yeah, I definitely feel like a lot. I'm trying to not say a lot of people, but there's a lot of flaws in that approach I mean, again, just coming back to either people misunderstanding or other people intentionally misinterpreting it for whatever various personal reasons. Because a lot of this stuff, if you, from my perspective, if you read it at face value, you'll come to the understanding that you and I have.
It comes down to your, and that's another part of something that I wanted to talk about, where um, identity is very important. When you are a single person and you have no family, no friends around you, you can't really accomplish much in life. You rely on things and people around you, your network, your circles that you build throughout your lifetime to help support you in your growth over time. And to me, in my mind, when somebody's like, "Oh, I worship chaos and destruction," it's like, okay, I mean, are you suicidal? Because I want to build great legacies for my family. I want to, build a future for my grandchildren. I don't want them to have to grow up like I had to grow up. I want
Yeah.
them to know their parents and grandparents and their extended network that helps them as not just materially in this world, but emotionally, physically, spiritually. I want them to grow and evolve. I don't want them to have problems, and I want them to be able to live a good life and pass on this knowledge to their children, so we can continue to have a good life for successive generations.
Yeah, when you're bringing chaos into the mix intentionally to any degree, it makes it extremely hard to build anything. Because like chaos is not like
Yeah.
the quote unquote dark.
Abs-
So it's not that it doesn't transfer to the balancing the inner light and dark or the man and the animal, the higher self or lower self. Like that's not what order and chaos mean to us.
I mean, this reminds me of a conversation that I had in the past, and I think it was Nietzsche that had argued about the two types of morality, the master morality and the slave morality. So, for example, master morality values pride and power in the overall goodness of its end results, whereas slave morality values things like kindness and empathy and sympathy. So, master morality weighs actions based on good or bad results. And you can look at this as classical virtues like vices and consequentialism, but slave morality weighs actions on a scale of good or evil intentions, which we can kind of compare to what most people would relate to as like the Christian virtues and vices.
I was just going to add to that that on the same token, we've all heard the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
The essence of master morality is what I guess Nietzsche called nobility. So other qualities that are often valued in master morality are open-mindedness, courageousness, truthfulness, uh, trustworthiness, and essentially a good sense of one's own personal self-worth. So I think the problem is that people that worship chaos don't value their own self-worth because they see themselves as single forces in the bigger scheme of things and have no effect upon the greater all. And so they have like this self-destructive mechanism in them that just wants to cause chaos and perversity and destruction.
As compared to in the nobility mentality, it's you're not just an individual. When you're operating from that mindset, you're by nature have to look at the benefits and harms, not just for yourself, but for those around you. At the very least, also those are immediately around you.
Exactly. And so I guess that connects, our identity, because when you recognize your value with those around you, you recognize how your actions affect those around you, whether good or bad. And this gets at the very core of, what our identity is as a people, because historically and traditionally, we've always valued our families. We've always valued our ancestors, to a lesser extent today than, 1,000+ years ago, obviously. But there's still a sense of value in everybody that comes before you. And the only way to continue to build on that value is by the tradition that has built a lot of power around it, which we would call our heminia, or our luck in life.
Yeah, and I feel like on a pretty similar note to what you just said, when you're looking at the world and you're looking at it as an individual, it's very easy to feel disempowered, weak. Um, and a lot of people that they come in, they're still starkly in the individualist mindset, not understanding that the way our ancestors looked at it, uh, you're you as an whoever as an individual first person came last. Like you were a part of your family, your clan, your tribe, your kingdom, whatever scale you want to look at, like you're a part of a greater whole. And for as social as human beings are, we are at our strongest when we are together, not as individuals.
We thrive when we are with other people. I'm sure everybody today has watched one of those survival shows that exist out there. Um, and that show alone is hardcore, man. Like, I feel like I could possibly do it, but I wouldn't want to make my body go through the things that are required to try to actually survive out there by yourself. Essentially, those shows, I mean, when you really look at them, it's torture, man. You're just watching somebody suffer, slowly starving to death in the stages and pains and things that they're going through that process.
Yeah.
So this whole concept of trying to survive alone is probably one of the hardest things one could ever possibly attempt to do. Can somebody do it? Can somebody survive by themselves? Yeah, I'm sure, no problem. There's people that are like that are strong and capable, but the majority of people rely on other people for their survival. And we've always recognized that. And so when we talk about like piety and morality, we have to understand that for our folk traditionally, and what hopefully someday it will be like this again, but honor was at the very core of our belief system. And that which dishonored our family or our tribe or clan would be something that would be devastating. And so that's one of the things where we have to look at how we interact, and looking at our actions on a bigger level, the bigger picture of things, and how they have effects on, other people and other lives, not just the people that we're directly interacting with, but all of those uh, waves from us throwing that rock in the water, per se.
Yeah. And I think to touch on honor real quick, that's a word that like in these days, like or it doesn't really have any meaning at all to most people. Like it's just a word. So when I think about honor, I'm going off of the presumption that most of our listeners are going to know about the nine noble virtues. But I feel like honor is what happens when you live those other eight virtues and dishonor is when you don't. As for yourself, your family, you know, again, going all the way up to the largest groups down to the smallest. But I just wanted to say something about that, like about that, because as I was listening to you, that's what crossed my mind is for 90% of people, especially my generation, I'm 31, my generation down, like these words sound cool, they make a good tattoo, but if you were to ask somebody what honor really means, they wouldn't have an answer for you.
That's very true. And I agree with your thoughts on it. And I would kind of just revert back to what I said earlier about, that which is good, bad yields bad results. And so if you are living in such a way that causes bad results, then you are not living with honor. I mean, look at, one of the things where we can look at, for example, adultery or cheating on your husband or wife. So a lot of people think that our ancestors were just these, I guess, Vikings or what would be modern day biker personas or something, where they just went around and had orgies all the time and had, all these huge parties and drinking parties. And that's not accurate at all. We had laws, we had codes, we had ethics, we had things that were important to us. Our ancestors recognized the importance of a husband and wife in a family. There were consequences for adultery, for example. I mentioned the story of Loki cutting Sif's hair off in the last episode, and if somebody was familiar with Germanic law code, they know exactly what that story is talking about, because for the Germanic people, part of the law was, if a person committed adultery, for example, a wife cheated on the husband or something, they would cut her hair off. And that was a sign and recognition that she had did something shameful, and everybody knew in the clan and the tribe exactly what that was. So when Loki cut Sif's hair off, he was taking her honor from her. And he was essentially insinuating to Thor that he had had sex with Sif, because there is an episode where Sif and Loki were alone together, and nobody knows what really happened except for those two. So when Loki cuts her hair off, he's implying to Thor that he had sex with her, and Thor made him restore her honor. I said people had to say, they're like, well, I saw the Vikings TV show and I saw this, movie and stuff. People need to get out of this Hollywood frame of mind. They need to get out of that. That's TV. Reality is our folk understood the importance of order and law. I mean, when Rig came down here, we can see in the Rig Stula, one of the things that he gave to our folk, to our people, to our ancestors, is he gave us the laws and the runes. And these taught us everything that we needed to know to build society. This taught us how to make fire, how to herd sheep, how to grow crops, how to build towns and civilizations. It's not in the interest of our people to cause destruction, because then everybody else suffers from it.
Yeah, and then just kind of briefly coming back with the Loki point, I think that story is also a good warning for flirting with that guy too much, because we'll, like you said, Sif and Loki are the only two that know what happened when they were alone, but because of that, Loki was able to cause her a whole bunch of problems, which is what he'll do to anybody. So
Yep. Yep.
I don't believe she did anything wrong. Just speaking the point of being alone with that guy and the things that it can cause.
Definitely. He caused chaos at every moment that he could from the
Yeah.
very beginning. Covered about piety. We covered a lot. Building tribe, I think, kind of is somewhat covered in all of that, and ethics and morals. definitely went over that. Some of the identity, definitely went over that. Didn't really discuss the timeline a whole lot, but touched up on a little bit of the lore. But I do want to jump into talking about the lore a little bit because I want to talk about what it is to us and why it's important. The lore is the oral tradition that was carried down from generation to generation from our ancestors. And it was important because it told us everything that happened from creation to the end of time. The lore explains rituals. The lore tells us things that have happened to our folk over time in interactions with other people, and essentially gives us a moral code to live by and a belief system, an understanding of the universe to help guide us as we're living our own lives and how to connect to that. Tacitus, I don't know if anybody's familiar, but he was a historian that lived shortly after, I guess, if Jesus Christ was real. Not sure if he was or not, but during a little bit after Jesus's time frame, around 100 AD, he had written about the Germanic folk. And he had mentioned in his writing, this was over 2,000 years ago, that they carry on their traditions and tell their stories orally to their people. And what I find amazing about that statement that was made 2,000 years ago is that Saxo Grammaticus, who was a contemporary of Snorri Sturluson, he actually wrote a history of the Danish people. And he wrote his book before Snorri ever wrote the Prose Edda, so it actually predates Snorri by about 60 years or so. But he was almost 1,200 years after Tacitus, and in his work he wrote almost the exact same statement about how the folk, the German folk, and the Danish people told their stories and carried their history on orally from generation to generation. And I think that's really significant and important for us to understand because we can see that there was a unbroken line of information that was being passed on for thousands of years. That doesn't happen unless there's a reason for it. And I think that it's important to consider that by itself. How, why is it important that this is being passed down for thousands of years?
I was going to say that it's interesting that, they had the runes, they had the ability to write all this stuff down, even if on stone tablets, but they had the ability, but they still chose to pass it down orally forever.
Why do you think that is?
So the way I understand it, and I can only kind of speak from me looking at it in the now. The way the stories were told, there was a rhythm to it that allowed the skalds that told it to easily remember it. That's how these skalds were able to remember all the stories in their detail, is because of this rhythm that acted as like a memory jog. Exactly.
Like nursery rhymes.
Exactly. But having that rhythm, it also makes it super hard to change the story. Because, anybody that has tried to write music or poetry, you can't you can change one word in something and the entire rhythm is messed up. To where if you just write something down, it's very easy to just change a word here, a couple words there, and the whole story gets messed up. So that's why I think it is because of the inherent protections that those oral rhythms had. It was a way to make sure the stories weren't changed by people with bad intentions.
That is definitely very good point. Something earlier, I'm going to read it actually. I read something earlier that really crossed my mind, and I know that this isn't Germanic per se, but does come from an Indo-European tradition. So for those who don't know, the Indo-European folk are the broader group of Europeans that spread throughout Western Europe and Southwestern Asia, I guess you would say. But I read this earlier, and I just, because of what I know about like Germanic law and stuff, it really struck me as like a universal understanding that our folk had in general. So let me this is from Pythagoras, actually, in the Golden Verses of Pythagoras. So it says, first, honor the immortal gods, as is established or ordained by the law. Proculus also had written a commentary to this, and what he said about it is the glorifications of the gods is affected by true belief in them and by doing good before them. The true belief about them is that they are good and the givers of all things, that they do not cause evil, that they are not susceptible to change because they are absolute, while change is a transition from something to something else, and that they are the knowers of things that truly are, with a knowledge uncontaminated by falsehood. Doing good varies according to the doer and his position. And so for each different rank, there are differences in sacrifices, incense, the use of pig and wine, festivals, and so on. And in this manner, ancestral ruling is followed. This is what is meant by law. The reason why the rulings of the law differ is that they conform to the differences among the minds, beliefs, and habitations of men. The law of the Athenians was to sacrifice the pig and to make offerings of diluted wine, whereas the Egyptians refused to sacrifice pigs. These are principles which were obtained from Hermes, who commanded man to abide by the laws of his fathers and ancestors and to avoid alien practices. In accordance with the disposition of each nation of mankind and its ancestral rule, the usages established by the wise men regarding sacrifice, festivals, and incense vary, and they trace back these principles specifically to the gods. This is why if any nation transgresses against its own custom, it perishes. The Egyptians and the Greeks mingled their customs together, while some people think it appropriate to direct prayer to the south, others to the north, and others in other directions. For the prescriptions of the law require the glorification of the gods in accordance with the regulations laid down by the ancestors concerning the offerings of sacrifices, incense, the directions of prayer, and so forth.
So what I got out of that is an understanding that different people have different gods, and therefore they must practice different ways. Like we as Europeans should not be acknowledging, say, the Egyptian pantheon and doing things their way when we have different gods.
Yeah,
And
I mean, it's definitely saying that, and this was written ago. This isn't a modern writer, a part of some political group or anything. These are things that our ancestors told us, and I think it relates directly back to the lore and what you were talking about, how the way that it was passed on orally was in such a way that it kept it locked or guarded so it couldn't be corrupted by outside forces. In the changing of words, you could tell by the rhythm or pattern that it wasn't natural. And so the law itself is the code of the law, and it's been passed down to us from the gods themselves. You can look at Voluspa, for example, where it tells us what happens from the beginning of time till the end of time, and the signs and different pieces of knowledge and information that we need. And this came directly from the gods. This is Erd speaking to Odin, fate speaking to Odin.
Yeah, listening to all this, it definitely don't make me feel good about what's going on in the States today, though. I mean, I don't want to get any
No,
more
no.
political than that, but like when it says that those that forget their customs fall, I'm just like, oh no, oh no.
No, I know. And, that's the destruction of, again, what we talked about in the last episode about universalism, where it's about bringing everybody under one belief system. And when you do that, you automatically destroy a culture, automatically destroy beliefs. And if and they persecute those people who don't conform to that universal view or worldview.
I mean, and on a similar but different note, trying to make all of a species the same thing doesn't work. Like one of the biggest things about nature is the diversity of nature. And when you attempt to unify, you wipe away all that diversity and really almost sign your death warrant to where all, not just us, but everybody, like the reason we have these different traditions of different peoples is because that's what allows us to grow and thrive. Speaking to the difference of a universal, unifying point of view on things, and then the difference between unification and diversity, like how that looks and what happens.
So I was thinking about after our last episode, I was thinking about Voluspa, and it talks about, like the dwarves making many likenesses of men, you know, and then it also starts talking about Odin making Ask and Embla. It starts Rig, when he can, and gave the laws to man and taught them fire and how to essentially build civilization. And these are things that I think with the lore were passed down to us because they have the building blocks in the message itself of us on how to uh, thrive all together as a people, because we are an extended family. We do come from one source. And so I think that the lore encodes an understanding for those that can really dig into it and grasp that understanding of what we have to do in today's society, because you have brought up a few times now about how divisive things are today and destructive and the chaos that's going on. But I think that if we look back to the past, we can begin rebuilding what actually held us together. And I think that's all encoded in the lore itself.
I would agree. The only caveat that I would personally add to that is obviously we can't live the way our ancestors did way back then, but we can still find those concepts and bring them into the present.
Well, and I think that's what a lot of people automatically assume when you talk about traditionalism, like, oh, are we trying to go back to riding horses and all this sorts of things? I believe, and I think history bears witness to the fact that our ancestors embraced growth and development. And when you actually look at the lore, you see just an infinite number of parallels between what we know from a scientific perspective about how the world and the universe operates.
Like in the same context of seeing science, um, I want to say it's metaphysics. I could be wrong. I know there's a field of science where they're looking at, like other dimensions, and that these dimensions being potentially higher and lower vibration, because everything in matter is a wavelength. So if something's on a wavelength that's going faster or slower than us, we could be in the same spot and not even realize it. And to a certain degree, I think the other 9 worlds are realms operating on higher or lower frequencies than us here in Midgard. Slight tangent, but I was thinking about the science bit.
Right. Tangent. And I actually want to do an episode in the future about the 9 worlds, because I think that's another huge misconception that a lot of people have. Just going back to Voluspa, where the 9 worlds concept comes from, it's actually talking about homes and not worlds. And I think that the cosmology that people understand today by the 9 worlds has been used by people since the 70s and 80s to syncretize that, I guess, phrase, the 9 worlds, with occult type practices. And I don't think that it's based in anything from our traditions, but I think that it is based on something that's designed to intentionally change our folks' understanding of our natural beliefs. But I do want to go back to talking about okay, so with the lore, I think that we have to, because you had brought up about guarding it with the meter and the poetry and how it's hard to change. So I believe that the lore, I mean, we know it was given to us by the gods themselves. The stories that have been handed down say exactly that. And they give us, essentially the rituals that we need in order to connect with them individually and communally as a people. So, for example, essentially, if you want to call upon something, you have to know how to do that. And so, in order to, for example, if I want to call you Anthony, I have to know what your phone number is. I can't just go out on my porch and yell out, Anthony. So I have to know what your phone number is. I have to dial that in. I have to know how to do that. I have to have the right tools and equipment to do that. It's the exact same thing with the gods and connecting with them. And this is the power of what the lore and the tradition is it gives us that information that we need in order to connect to our higher divinities. People out there that aren't, so inclined towards traditionalism means, riding horses or wagons or carts or something like that. But it doesn't. What it means, traditionalism means, is that we know that how to connect to our gods, to our people, to our folk. The ancient view of life leads thought beyond the individual. One always looks among family to find the sources of his will and fate. The honor he bequeaths to his children, with the prayer to have it raised on high like a banner in the light, is his share of the honor which all the kinsmen combined to guard and unite and enjoin. The parent's eye is gladdened when they see themselves and their kinsmen and their children, when they see the luck of the family in their own children.
This has been The Sacred Stew. I am Anthony. My cohort is James. Y'all have a good night.